Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Curiosity Dude. Today, we're diving deep into the adventures of the human body before humanity even graced the Earth. For millions of years, this intricate evolution was anything but straightforward. Prepare to embark on an epic journey through time as we explore the fascinating twists and turns that set the stage for the most sophisticated organism on the planet, you. So, hit that subscribe button and let's unravel the mysteries of our ancient origins together. And now, let me tell you a little bit about the broader context of our history. I'm not just talking about skin and hair here, because for our skin to change color, for our hair to evolve, these things needed to come into existence in the first place as natural phenomena. Our bodies are the result of countless events that unfolded throughout the long history of our planet, often for the most unpredictable reasons. That is, definitely not for the purposes they serve us now. We all know it all started with the Big Bang, but I won't delve into that because, honestly, I don't know much about it myself. So, I'll start from the time when the so-called primordial soup came into being. Of course, primordial soup needs a bit of explanation. It's essentially the state of water and various substances on planet Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. It contained all sorts of dissolved chemicals: phosphorus, fluorine, copper, iron, hydrogen, carbon, and so on. With the right temperature, acidity, and bombarded by cosmic rays, and occasionally meteorites, the whole mix started to cook itself. Somewhere in this primordial soup, in the early Archean era, around 4.5 billion years ago, life appeared. How exactly it happened is still a big question. The process of biogenesis is actively studied now, but many smart folks have proposed various theories on how life might have emerged. Darwin suggested it might have started in a warm little pond, and despite this idea being an early one, it remains a plausible hypothesis. Some suggest it could have begun in deep-sea hydrothermal vents, where volcanic activity spewed out all sorts of chemicals. But there are questions about whether deep-sea vents even existed 4.5 billion years ago because it's not certain there was enough water on Earth back then. Where did all the water come from? Was it degassed from Earth's mantle, or did it come from a comet that crashed and melted, forming the oceans? Other theories suggest it could have been in alkaline hydrothermal vents, where minerals formed tiny porous structures that got coated with organic materials, creating cell-like structures. The solution inside these structures could be seen as a primitive form of cytoplasm. And from here, it was just a matter of getting something alive to form. Maybe it was aluminosilicate clay, which might please religious folks since the idea of life forming from clay is present in various traditions. I mean, the Sumerians thought so, and the Bible picked up on it. It could have been a mud volcano, which is kind of the same idea but with more bubbling and heat. These hydrothermal vents or geysers, often hot and active, are known to encourage reactions, much like cooking food is more effective when it's boiled, rather than left raw. The hypothesis of life forming in fumaroles is also intriguing. Fumaroles are essentially underground geysers, shielded from the harsh UV radiation that, for 0.5 billion years ago, would have destroyed emerging life before it had a chance to get started. Scientists have come up with more ideas for how life could have begun than there are actual instances of life. This is fascinating because while genetic coding is essentially the same across all organisms, implying life began once, it suggests the planet was uniquely primed for this one-off event. Life likely emerged several times and continues to form in tiny warm ponds, geysers, or fumaroles even now, but the existing bacteria quickly consume any new organic material. So, while the odds of new life forming are slim, they're not zero. Eventually, RNA appeared as the first self-replicating molecule. Then came DNA, which is more stable because it's double-stranded and better protected. With time, cellular structures emerged, cell membranes and cytoplasm formed, bringing together nucleotides, which store information, proteins, coded by nucleotides, and lipid membranes, encasing it all. Voila cell. And thus, the building blocks of life were born. The conditions of those early environments, like acidity and mineral content, set the stage. Had our planet been different, life might not have formed at all, or it might have looked vastly different. Absolutely, many of our basic properties were shaped by the early conditions of the Archean Earth, which were quite different from today. Our current problems often stem from changes in these conditions over time. This change was good in a way because, without it, those early organisms wouldn't have evolved and adapted as they did. During the Archean and Proterozoic eons, eukaryotes, nucleus-containing organisms, emerged, capable of forming little compartments inside themselves. These compartments allowed different reactions to occur without interfering with each other, unlike prokaryotes, bacteria, which usually can only perform one type of reaction at a time. Eukaryotes needed more DNA, which required energy. This energy came from mitochondria, which were once independent bacteria that got incorporated into eukaryotes. These mitochondria use oxygen, initially a toxic waste product from early anaerobic bacteria, but later repurposed for energy production. Ancient bacteria formed layers called stromatolites. The top layer consisted of photosynthetic bacteria, which got energy from sunlight and expelled waste products. The middle layer also sometimes contained photosynthetic bacteria, utilizing the energy passing through from the top layer. The bottom layer contained bacteria that couldn't perform photosynthesis, surviving on the scant energy left over. These early bacteria produced oxygen as a waste product, which was toxic to them. To cope, they incorporated mitochondria, which used this oxygen, turning a problem into a solution by harnessing oxygen for energy, a huge evolutionary win. To see how much energy oxygen can produce, just try burning something, carefully and not right now, of course. You'll feel the immense energy output from oxidation. So, the real challenge is figuring out how to regulate all that energy. Using it efficiently allows for the development of complex, multicellular organisms with large genomes, coding for all sorts of specialized cells in a single body. Brain cells, liver cells, left toe cells, they all have the same DNA but use different parts of it. This requires a massive, well-regulated DNA blueprint, something not possible without oxygen and mitochondria. All of this is, of course, an oversimplification. Our understanding, based on fossils and comparisons to modern bacteria, is still pretty limited and hazy. Most of what we know comes from blurry ancient rocks and a lot of educated guesswork. The clearer story begins in the Cambrian period, when large, multicellular organisms capable of synthesizing hard body parts started to appear. These creatures needed lots of oxygen, which had by then been plentifully supplied by earlier life forms. Hard substances, like bones or shells, require a lot of energy to create, hence the importance of oxygen. You can test this by burning something, carefully, not now, seeing just how much energy is released. In the early Cambrian, creatures like trilobites dominated. By the mid-Cambrian, more terrifying predators like anomalocaridids appeared, sort of like giant, wicked shrimp. Later came nautiloids with their long, straight shells, and eurypterids, sea scorpions, with venomous claws. Our ancestors back then were small, vulnerable, and lacking hard exoskeletons. Basically, they were tiny, squishy lancelets. They had one crucial advantage: a notochord, a sort of primitive spine that allowed them to swim quickly and efficiently. It's amazing to think that these early life forms set the stage for all the diversity we see today, adapting and evolving through countless generations. So, in the Ordovician and Silurian periods, the development of a basic skeleton marked a significant evolutionary step. Initially, These skeletons were simple rings of calcium and phosphorus around the notochord. Over time, these structures evolved into cartilage and eventually bone. This internal endoskeleton wasn't much for protection at first, but it provided a crucial advantage: speed. Speed was essential for early vertebrates to outmaneuver predators that were becoming increasingly efficient hunters. Some organisms, such as mollusks and arthropods, opted for an external exoskeleton. This had its benefits, offering substantial protection, but came with drawbacks. An exoskeleton is heavy, limits growth, and makes it challenging to move on land. This is why you don't see giant land-dwelling insects. There's a practical size limit due to their exoskeletons. In contrast, an internal skeleton is lighter, allows for continuous growth, and makes land colonization more feasible. Another monumental leap was the development of the neural tube. In invertebrates, the nervous system is composed of ganglia, which are clusters of nerve cells. These ganglia face a unique challenge. As they grow, the inner cells struggle to get nutrients because the surrounding cells consume most of the available resources. Our chordate ancestors innovated by developing a neural tube with a central cavity filled with cerebrospinal fluid. This allowed for the distribution of nutrients both inside and outside the tube, supporting a larger and more complex nervous system. Initially, the neural tube didn't offer a significant competitive edge, but it laid the groundwork for more sophisticated neural structures. It enabled quicker reflexes and better maneuverability, which were crucial for survival. Detecting predators became vital, and while chemical receptors, chemoreception, were useful, vision offered a tremendous advantage. Eyes evolved independently multiple times across various lineages, enhancing the ability to detect and respond to threats and opportunities in the environment. Our lineage wasn't particularly creative with eye evolution compared to some invertebrates, which developed complex compound eyes. Trilobites, for instance, had eyes made of calcite crystals, a fascinating adaptation. While our ancestors' eyes were simpler, they still provided critical information about the environment, such as the distance to a predator, its speed, shape, and color. The advent of the closed circulatory system was another game-changer. Unlike open systems where blood sloshes around freely, a closed system circulates blood through vessels, allowing for precise delivery of nutrients and oxygen. This system, present in some segmented worms too, was highly efficient. It enabled selective activation of body parts, critical for small, filter-feeding organisms that needed to be energy efficient. Up until the end of the Silurian period, many of these amazing properties were just latent potentials. There were many primitive creatures, but fewer of our direct ancestors, and because they lacked hard skeletal elements, their fossil records are sparse and fragmented. Most of our knowledge comes from rare, well-preserved sites in places like China and Canada. The real turning point came at the end of the Silurian and into the Devonian period. During the Devonian, the planet experienced some of its hottest temperatures ever. The scorching climate made the Devonian one of the hottest periods in Earth's history, far surpassing today's global warming scenarios. This heat, combined with the appearance of vascular plants, changed everything. Plants initially appeared in the Silurian, but it was in the Devonian that they grew larger, moving onto land, creating soil, and stabilizing it with their roots. These roots, though not particularly sturdy, anchored plants, which would occasionally fall back into the water and rot. This process was hindered by the fact that fungi and bacteria capable of decomposing lignin, a component of plant cell walls, hadn't yet evolved, leading to slow decomposition. In warm, shallow waters, oxygen dissolves poorly, much like if you heat mineral water or champagne, the gases escape. The decaying vegetation further depleted oxygen levels, creating anoxic, oxygen-poor conditions. To break down lignin requires a lot of oxygen, and its scarcity made life difficult. Our ancestors, the lobe-finned fish, or sarcopterygians, faced these challenges head-on. Several lineages of these fish developed lungs as an adaptation to breathe air in these oxygen-poor environments. Lungs evolved from outgrowths of the throat. This adaptation wasn't unique to our ancestors. Modern fish like the walking catfish and lungfish have independently developed similar structures. To complement air breathing, the evolution of the neck became advantageous. This allowed early tetrapods to lift their heads out of the water. There's also a theory that necks evolved for snapping at prey on the water's surface, though typically the mouth just moves upwards in such scenarios. Regardless, the neck provided mobility and an advantage in various environments. Breathing air posed another challenge: how to breathe without ingesting water. Fish have two pairs of nostrils, one pair for intake and the other for outflow. One of these nostrils eventually moved inside the mouth, becoming the choana, or internal nostril. We have intermediate fossil forms showing this transition, where one nostril is positioned among the teeth, eventually leading to the internal configuration we see today. This adaptation allowed these early creatures to stick just the tip of their snouts out of the water, breathe air without gulping water, and use their nostrils for both olfaction and respiration. One big problem for these early fish was that their habitats were often cluttered with fallen trees and debris. Imagine trying to hunt in a messy swamp filled with logs. These fish could grow quite large, up to 1.5 or even 2 meters long, which made navigating these crowded waters difficult. They developed robust, lobe-finned limbs to maneuver over and around the obstacles. Over time, these adaptations turned out to be quite handy for venturing onto land. There were several good reasons to make the move. Shade provided by plants on land helped prevent drying out, and it was often easier to find new food sources or safer places to lay eggs away from aquatic predators. Moving to a new water body could also be strategic for survival and reproduction. It's believed that during this period, the moon was much closer to Earth than it is today, resulting in much stronger tides. These tides could have stranded fish in tidal pools far from the coast, forcing them to adapt to terrestrial life or risk perishing as the water receded. This constant push and pull likely played a significant role in driving evolutionary changes. To survive on land, these early tetrapods developed advanced skin glands. While scales were common among aquatic fish, they evolved to produce mucus for protection. On land, these glands adapted further, leading to the development of sweat glands, sebaceous glands, mammary glands, and more. These glands helped prevent desiccation and offered other advantages, such as thermoregulation and communication through scent. However, these adaptations came with trade-offs. While they enabled life on land, they also meant losing some aquatic abilities. For instance, our ancestors lost the ability to breathe underwater with gills. Occasionally, rare atavisms can cause humans to have small gill-like structures on their necks, but these are not functional gills. Given our energy-hungry brains that require a constant supply of oxygen, even if humans had functional gills, they wouldn't be efficient enough to meet our needs. It's a bit like the myth of the ichthyander from literature. Surgically grafting gills from a young shark onto a human would not make them highly intelligent or efficient. In reality, we'd need a gill surface area the size of a stadium to breathe underwater effectively, which is clearly impractical. As time progressed, we entered the Carboniferous period, an era lush with dense forests that had a significant impact on the planet's environment. Giant ferns and the first seed-bearing plants flourished, reducing the dependency on water and transforming the landscape. Insects, including some gigantic dragonflies with wingspans of up to 70 centimeters and colossal cockroach-like creatures, thrived in these forests. The abundance of plant material led to increased oxygen levels in the atmosphere, benefiting these insects since they breathe through tracheae rather than lungs. Higher oxygen levels meant they could grow larger and become more active. Our amphibian ancestors, the stegocephali, adapted to these changing environments. They developed skin glands to keep their skin moist but still faced the challenge of desiccation, particularly for their eggs, which had delicate, thin membranes that dried out quickly. To solve this, they evolved amniotic eggs with a protective shell. The outer shell provided physical protection, while the amniotic membrane inside prevented desiccation and created a personal aquatic environment for the developing embryo. This adaptation allowed for the transition from water to land, as these eggs could be laid in drier environments without the risk of drying out. The evolution of amniotes marked a significant step forward, enabling these early creatures to fully exploit terrestrial habitats. The Carboniferous period also saw the emergence of early reptiles like Hylonomus, which inhabited the hollow trunks of ancient trees known as sigillaria. These tree trunks provided shelter and protection, and the bones of these early reptiles have been well preserved in these unique fossil sites. However, this transition came with its challenges. Unlike amphibians, where larval stages, like tadpoles, lived in water and adults on land, amniotes had to face the competition for resources between juveniles and adults. Yet, during the Carboniferous, the abundance of food and lack of large terrestrial predators made this less of an issue. The adaptations of these early reptiles set the stage for further diversification and the eventual dominance of vertebrates on land. With improved respiratory systems, efficient circulatory systems, and protective skin, these creatures were well equipped to conquer new environments. So, here's a funny thing about pioneering new ecological niches in paleontology. Often, when a species is the first to colonize a new niche, it can get away with having some pretty questionable traits. It's like getting a free pass because there's no competition yet. Take amphibians, for example. Their circulatory systems are actually more primitive compared to fish. Amphibians have a 3-chambered heart, but the blood gets mixed before it reaches the brain. Fish, on the other hand, have a more straightforward, oxygen-rich supply. Yet, because amphibians were the first to venture onto land, they managed just fine until reptiles showed up, making life much tougher for them. But then came the Permian period, which was a total game-changer. All the continents smushed together to form Pangaea, messing with equatorial currents. It got pretty bleak, cold, and dry, especially away from the coasts, much like how it feels in some places today. Hello, Winnipeg. During this time, ice ages came and went, making life even harder. Reptiles and amphibians, being cold-blooded, had a rough time. Enter the therapsids, early mammal-like reptiles that developed some nifty tricks to stay warm. They evolved heterodont dentition, meaning they had different types of teeth for different functions: incisors for grabbing, canines for tearing, and molars for chewing. Unlike reptiles, which have uniform teeth that aren't great at processing food, these guys could chow down more efficiently. They also developed cheeks to keep food from falling out of their mouths. Super handy. Crocodiles, for instance, are estimated to lose a significant portion of their food because they can't hold it in. Therapsids also developed chewing movements, moving their jaws side to side, which led to changes in their jaw structure. This had an unintended consequence. It made their hearing worse. Unlike reptiles, which use their jawbones to detect ground vibrations, therapsids' jaws evolved away from this function, leading to the development of an external ear to better catch airborne sounds. But getting and retaining energy wasn't enough. They needed to conserve it too. That's where fur comes in. Early therapsids developed fur and whiskers. We know this because fossilized bones show nutrient channels, especially around the face where whiskers are, indicating increased sensitivity. Fossilized poop, yup, you read that right, even contains ancient fur remnants, proving these critters were sporting some fuzz as far back as 300 million years ago. And speaking of adaptations, let's talk about the Carboniferous period, when dense forests dominated the planet. Insects like giant dragonflies and cockroach-like critters flourished thanks to higher oxygen levels. With no competition, early amphibians could thrive despite having less efficient circulatory systems. But when reptiles evolved, amphibians had to step up their game. And so, we lost the ability to fast. Normal cold-blooded animals can go for a year and a half without eating anything. I sometimes envy them, but we humans always seem to be hungry. On my trip from Moscow, I started snacking on the train. Then I had a couple of slices of pizza when I arrived, and I'll probably eat something else soon. It's an endless cycle of munching. Take reptiles like turtles and crocodiles. They can go for a year and a half without food, maybe even longer. I have red-eared slider turtles at home, and sometimes the kids forget to feed them for 2 weeks. They're fine. If they were hamsters, I wouldn't have any left by now. But those turtles just keep on living. During this time, new insect forms like stoneflies, caddisflies, and mayflies emerged. These insects had aquatic larvae that accumulated nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen in water before becoming adults and flying away. One mayfly might seem insignificant, but collectively, they made a huge impact. In some North American lakes, layers of shed mayfly skins can reach up to 1.5 meters thick. Over millions of years, these insects transported enormous amounts of nutrients from water to land. Meanwhile, plants with decent roots began stabilizing soils, further depleting water of nutrients. As the Permian period progressed, temperatures dropped, and then at the end of the period, it started warming up again. This combination of factors wreaked havoc on marine ecosystems, leading to one of the most devastating mass extinctions in Earth's history. Volcanic eruptions and other disasters only added to the chaos. The boundary between the Paleozoic and Mesozoic eras is marked by the end of the Permian period, which saw massive extinctions. Some of our ancestors survived, though, and through the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods, they evolved into mammals. Early mammals had their own set of problems. Initially, they laid small eggs. Imagine an echidna or a platypus egg, tiny and fragile, making survival tough. Marsupials developed next, but their embryos were often rejected by the mother's immune system before reaching full term, resulting in premature births and high mortality rates. Placental mammals solved this with the development of the placenta, a remarkable organ that evolved from a viral infection. The virus manipulated the immune system, allowing embryos to develop longer inside the mother. This organ, made from both maternal and embryonic tissues, created a protective barrier, enabling the embryo to grow larger and stronger before birth. The oldest known placental mammal, Juramea, from China, dates back to the Jurassic period. Though dinosaurs dominated the landscape, these early mammals scurried around the forest floor, living nocturnally and feeding on insects. This nocturnal lifestyle led to a decline in their ability to see red and green colors. No use for these colors in the dark. Despite losing some visual capabilities, their sense of smell improved, helping them navigate their dimly lit world. Evolution is a trade-off, after all. But during the Mesozoic era, something amazing happened. Flowering plants emerged. They invented flowers, nectar, and fruits, changing the game entirely. Along came pollinators and wood recyclers like termites, ants, and bees. Oh, and butterflies too. The appearance of flowering plants set the stage for our modern ecosystems. Flowering plants are all about branching out, literally. Unlike the old-school trees with simple, straight branches, these new plants created a three-dimensional habitat teeming with life. This complexity required animals to develop acrobatic skills to navigate the tangled branches. Early mammals, especially, benefited from this environment. Their limbs evolved for grasping, and their shoulder and pelvic girdles became more flexible. Insects became a primary food source, and our ancestors loved them. Termites were a favorite snack, and even today, they're still on the menu for some species. Around the middle of the Cretaceous period, flowering plants thrived and diversified, solidifying their place in the ecosystem. By the end of the Cretaceous, small-leaved trees like birches and aspens were everywhere. While they might sound patriotic, they weren't great for grazing. These trees lacked nutrients, which contributed to the decline of some dinosaur species. During this time, our ancestors took to the trees, evolving into early primatomorphs like Purgatorius. This marked the beginning of the Cenozoic era and the rise of mammals. The early Cenozoic, particularly the Paleocene and Eocene epochs, was a golden age for our ancestors. With dinosaurs out of the picture, large predators were scarce. But by the end of the Paleocene, nocturnal predators like owls and tree-dwelling hunters began to appear, giving our ancestors a run for their money. Animals like Vulpavus and Viverravus started climbing trees, forcing early primates to become more agile and quick-witted. These early primates were generalists, eating everything from insects to fruits. Their teeth were adapted for a varied diet, with sharp points for biting insects and flat surfaces for chewing plants. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in our evolutionary journey. But we had our challenges. The good news was we were pretty fast. On tall trees, being quick meant we could raise our young ones for longer periods. Thus, the strategy of having fewer but larger babies with relatively big brains emerged. These youngsters lived longer and needed extended care, laying the foundation for learning and education. Unlike instincts and reflexes, these kids had to learn a lot. Adaptability became key. One day we were eating bugs, the next day worms, then nectar and fruits. Remembering where everything was also became crucial. But we did lose some fertility along the way. The ideal of big families and family values took a hit. Plus, our sense of smell diminished since it wasn't as vital up in the trees. Our whiskers, or vibrissae, also became less important. Unlike a cat, whose whiskers are quite handy, we started to lose ours. Even chimpanzees have whiskers, but they're not essential. When you're leaping from branch to branch, using touch isn't practical, vision becomes more important. Eyes started to face forward, gradually developing binocular vision. The Eocene was a warm period known as the Eocene optimum, with temperatures about 14 degrees warmer than today. It was so warm that even places like Canada and Greenland had tropical forests. Imagine climate scientists today freaking out over half a degree of global warming. They wouldn't have survived the Eocene. In these tropical forests, rodents and bats appeared, significantly impacting our ancestors' evolution. Our early relatives, being tree dwellers themselves, also wanted to take to the skies. After all, flying was a quick way to access resources like ripe dates. But bats beat us to it, filling that ecological niche. Rodents, with their specialized chewing apparatus, prevented our ancestors from dominating the ground initially. This was actually beneficial. Otherwise, we might have evolved into something akin to large rodents. Instead, primates stayed in the trees, evolving rapidly. Primates like Archicebus, an early tarsia-like creature, and Eosimias, the first true monkey, emerged. Their hands evolved from clawed fingers to nails, allowing them to grasp objects more efficiently. This paved the way for tool use and complex behaviors. But then, something nasty came along. Cats. Yes, those sneaky predators made life more complicated. Around the same time, vivarids, like civets, and weasels emerged too. Take the cats around here, cute, fluffy, and often demanding attention. But those ancient cats? Not so cuddly. They were apex predators, feasting on birds, rodents, and primates, including our ancestors. Essentially, these predators evolved specifically to hunt us down. In Africa and Asia, leopards and other big cats are still a threat to humans. Our ancestors had two options to evade these dangers: speed and size. Some evolved to become faster, leading to the development of monkey-like primates. For example, Savannas was an intermediary between monkeys and apes. On the other hand, larger apes evolved to deter predators simply by their size. Bigger animals are less likely to be attacked. Being larger also meant they could consume more diverse food, including plants. Smaller apes relied more on insects, but as they grew bigger, catching bugs became energy inefficient. Instead, they turned to fruits, which required a larger digestive system to process. Eating colorful fruits also helped them redevelop color vision. Bright fruits and flowers stood out, making them easier to spot. However, as they grew larger, they lost their undercoat. Small animals needed this insulation, but larger ones did not. Modern primates either have a very rudimentary undercoat or none at all. The tail also became redundant. As they grew larger, using the tail for balance during fast jumps was less necessary. They left the tail behind as they evolved. Interestingly, some South American monkeys retained their grasping tails, using them to hold objects. Primates staying in the trees continued to evolve. Various large herbivores like elephants and rhinos appeared, shaping the landscape into savannas. Our ancestors, though still forest dwellers, grew to the size of modern chimpanzees, about 40 to 50 kilograms. These early hominins couldn't leap long distances anymore. While modern humans can barely manage a jump of 1.5 meters, ancient monkeys could leap up to 10 meters. Our jumping abilities certainly diminished. During the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, more geological changes were happening. India finally slammed into Asia after drifting towards it since the Mesozoic era. This collision pushed up the Himalayas, altering atmospheric circulation patterns and changing the climate. The climate started to cool significantly after a brief optimal period in the Miocene. Tropical forests in Africa began to disappear, and the situation was even worse in Eurasia, where many species went extinct. Our ancestors in Africa were forced to move into the emerging savannas. Initially, they didn't want to live in the savanna but preferred to dash from one grove to the next. In these open areas, predators like cats, which had migrated to Africa from Europe, were waiting for them. This pressure led our ancestors to stand on two legs. While they could have remained quadrupedal like baboons, they opted for bipedalism. Their bodies had already adapted to vertical climbing due to their larger size, making it easier to walk upright. Running on all fours with a big belly on narrow branches wasn't practical. Walking on two legs, while using their arms for balance, became more efficient. Recent discoveries of Denuvius fossils, with well-preserved pelvises and skeletons, illustrate this adaptation beautifully. These early humans walked on two legs in the trees and brought this habit down to the ground. The challenges of terrestrial life, including overheating, predators, and scattered food resources, led to a selection for increased sociality. Early humans developed smaller canines and shorter jaws, becoming gentler. Selfish individuals didn't survive long because they couldn't protect their offspring. Those who cared for each other and cooperated had better survival rates. The idyllic forest life was over. Competition with giant geladas, which were meter-high aggressive baboons, led to the extinction of many early hominins. Meanwhile, giant hoofed animals disappeared, replaced by the modern ones we know today. The same thing happened with giant predators like the saber-toothed cats and monstrous Pachycracuda. Their extinction created a brief window of opportunity, and our ancestors seized it. The early Homo species started to eat meat, requiring a larger brain and better tools. Their brains grew rapidly, crossing the so-called brain Rubicon at around 700 to 900 grams. Homo rudolfensis and Homo habilis emerged, using tools and spreading out. However, their tree-climbing days were over. Take Lucy, the famous Australopithecus afarensis. Her skeleton shows multiple fractures, suggesting she fell from a tree. This indicates that even 3.5 million years ago, our ancestors were struggling with their arboreal abilities. To thrive on the ground, they needed open spaces. At this time, voles appeared in Eurasia, burrowing and reshaping the land, creating grasslands. These new environments supported various hoofed animals, which later became vital food sources for early humans. Roughly 2 million years ago, humans began migrating out of Africa into these open spaces, reaching as far as Indonesia. Initially sticking to tropical zones, they eventually spread further. The tropical paradise was left behind, and those who stayed in Africa continued to evolve. Those who migrated faced new challenges, including ice ages in Europe, where they encountered mammoths and reindeer. The alternating glacial and interglacial periods created a constantly changing environment, pushing our ancestors to adapt continually. As they moved across diverse landscapes, their ability to innovate and survive was put to the test. However, there were some benefits during this time. Due to climate changes, giant deposits of loess, wind-blown silt, formed, creating extremely fertile soil. These loess deposits, sometimes up to 6 meters deep, became a foundation for future civilizations. Archaeologists love digging through these loess layers to uncover ancient artifacts, but loess also formed the basis of fertile farmland, supporting the rise of Eurasian civilizations. Thanks to these rich soils, we can sit here today, well-fed and housed, enjoying the fruits of our ancestors' labor. Around 350,000 to 400,000 years ago, our ancestors began hunting large game in Eurasia. They developed clothing and tools, and, as a side note, picked up lice along the way. Fire usage became common, leading to significant physical changes. Cooked food was easier to digest, reducing jaw and tooth size. Our pelvises became narrower, our stomachs smaller, and our rib cages more compact. We also learned to speak around this time, a huge leap forward. But the carefree life was gone for good, except for some modern folks who still enjoy a bit of relaxation. Then, around 73,000 to 74,000 years ago, disaster struck. The Toba supervolcano erupted, creating a massive crater that is now a lake. It was one of the largest eruptions in Earth's history, spewing vast amounts of ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and causing temperatures to plummet. This sudden cooling led to glaciation, and many human species, such as the hobbits, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, faced extinction. Some survived in isolated pockets, even interbreeding with early modern humans, leaving traces in our DNA. The hobbits, however, were less fortunate. Archaeological evidence shows that some of our ancestors navigated through this ash, with tools found buried in Toba's ash layers in India. Imagine living under 6 meters of ash. Talk about a tough situation. There's a hypothesis that this global catastrophe cleared the path for our ancestors. Before the eruption, Homo sapiens who ventured out of Africa ran into Neanderthals, Denisovans, and others, making expansion difficult. But after the Toba eruption, their numbers dwindled, giving Homo sapiens a chance to spread out, and spread out they did. Around 50,000 to 55,000 years ago, Homo sapiens left Africa for the last time in a species-wide sense and settled across the planet. This brings us closer to the modern era, where we became the main factor in our own evolution. We try to make things better, but it doesn't always work out that way. Which side of our actions will tip the scale is a big question. We produce a lot but also generate waste, polluting our environment. Evolution has always been about adapting to challenges, whether it was developing lungs, legs, or fur. Now, we need to adapt to the mess we've created, which isn't easy. The main challenge is that the pace of environmental change, driven by us, is faster than we can adapt. With generation times of 25 years, we're outpaced by our own pollution. One potential solution is genetic engineering. For instance, some fungi can break down plastic. If we could incorporate the genes for these plastic-digesting enzymes into ourselves, imagine drinking from a plastic bottle and then digesting it on the spot, solving both pollution and hunger. Who knows what the future holds, but we have a unique advantage: our complex, active brains. Unlike our predecessors who simply perished or survived, we have the potential to change the game and ensure survival through innovation. It's anyone's guess where this will lead, but let's hope our so-called wise species, Homo sapiens, can navigate through this challenging landscape. After all, we have the brains. Now we just need to use them wisely. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through our evolutionary history. From the primordial soup to modern Homo sapiens, our ancestors faced countless challenges and adapted in incredible ways. As we move forward, our intelligence and creativity will be key to overcoming new obstacles. If you enjoyed this dive into the past and want more fascinating insights, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. Let's keep exploring the amazing story of humanity together. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.